From any to any. One of the core capabilities of Acronis is this very germination of an idea, and it's a brilliant thing to use in a hosting environment, but I don't have to tell you about it. Who's going to tell you about it is somebody who makes all the rest of us look smart. He's our Director of Solution Engineering. Please welcome Stephen Nichols. Stephen.
Excellent, thank you. Welcome, thank you for joining. My name is Stephen Nichols. As Jeff said, I'm going to talk a little bit about from any to any. And really what this is about, I want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the things that are going on, some of the threats, and how you can mitigate some of those threats. And then I also want to talk a little bit about how, just philosophically, you can use some of the tools in Acronis CyberTech Cloud in order to protect your workloads in some kind of creative ways. So the first thing I want to talk about is the new world of threats. So there's a lot of people when you say, what's the biggest risk, what's going to cause downtime, they think of natural disasters. Well, in fact, only 6% of downtime is actually caused by natural disasters. We've done a really good job as an industry of mitigating those things, right? We can have redundancy in place. We can basically have the facilities and the infrastructure. We know a little, fairly well how to protect against that. Over the last few years, we've certainly been impacted a little bit from a natural side with the pandemic. But again, I think we've all kind of adjusted to the new reality. And, hardware failure and software corruption continue to be an issue. A lot of the time, there is definitely some vulnerability. But again, it's something we can kind of, at least at some level, predict and manage. The two main areas, honestly, that cause the biggest impact is accidental deletion, right? So this is, end user error, people doing things that they shouldn't do, and cyber attacks, right? So a lot of the data loss, a lot of the problems, a lot of the reasons that you don't have continuity of the business is because of malware. It's because of the fact that there is people actively trying to stop you from being able to be in business. And when we talk about business, there's a huge financial impact. And quite honestly, especially small and medium businesses can't afford any downtime. So there's a lot, for when they try to resolve it themselves, particularly without the assistance of a service provider, they're spending about 200 minutes of IT time, but they're losing over 500 hours of lost employee productivity time. That is a huge cost for SMBs. So it's not really, again, it's not about the infrastructure. It's not about the fact that things are going to go offline because there's a giant storm. But there is definitely real risk. On top of that, there's a huge amount of effort that it takes in order to, if you are wanting to move from one location to another location, if you have a case where you just need to move workloads around, that can become complicated and expensive as well. So we, at Acronis, we've got a couple of things that we can do. So first of all, we do support a broad range of workloads for a cloud disaster recovery scenario. So you can take workloads you may be running in your data center, whether that's on a Windows server, whether it's on a Linux server, and we can actually take those workloads, back them up to the Acronis cloud, and if you need that business continuity, you can spin those workloads up in our cloud in real time. It takes about usually 3 to 5 minutes to be back up and running. And that technology really kind of assists with the cost of having to have extra hardware if you have an outage. And it can be direct to cloud, so it doesn't necessarily require any additional architecture or hardware on your side. And we do support a broad range of virtualization platforms. Now, when we talk about sort of the high-level architecture of what it looks like, in the Acronis data center, we have our backup and DR console, the management console, so all of that that's all running in our data center. So is the hot and cold storage. So we can then protect Hyper-V, VMware, physical servers. It's a very easy system that allows you to be able to protect those workloads and run them in our cloud. So that's that's one of the first of any to any. You can take any of those things and run them. Now, there's a couple of other interesting things that I think actually have even more applicability to hosting. So we actually built into our solution, we have something which we call instant restore. And so that gives you the ability to, if you're using our platform, once you have backed up a workload, once you've taken a server and you have a backup of that server, you can leverage Hyper-V or VMware in the environment and instantly restore that backup and have that workload up and running. So it actually addresses a couple of interesting use cases. You can use it like our cloud DR solution to be able to do disaster recovery locally on the hardware. It also allows you to validate and test those backups. You can run those machines, make sure everything is ready so that you're actually prepared, so that if you have an outage, it's not when you find out that maybe the way you had structured the backups weren't capturing all the data that you needed or something like that. And if you have a lot of applications, so I know a lot of the hosting workloads often are application-based, you can actually spin those up and be able to access the data that is in those applications. And when a lot of times, it's not a restore, it only takes a couple of minutes to spin up, so it's a much faster tool. So if you need that to get to that data, it's a really, really good way to be able to manage that. The other thing that is really interesting is because we have a lot of different workloads that we can back up. We have a lot of different platforms that we integrate into. That instant restore is used by a lot of partners to do migration. Because the first step in that process of doing the restore spins that up, and you can actually have that spun up very, very quickly. And then we have a thing called finalize. You can hit a button, and what it will do is copy the data from the backup location and move that to the other location. So it makes it really easy if you need to move from one environment to another environment to be able to very quickly do that. Our backup and recovery tools can also be used for migration. You don't even need the instant restore. And so you can do either a physical to virtual, virtual to virtual, or even virtual to physical. And that's because of the way that the level at which our backups are done. In most cases, you're able to actually restore those to dissimilar hardware. So you can start out by just using our cloud management console to be able to do that. But we also even have things like bootable media. So if you want to go to a physical server, we have an ability to install a lightweight version of the operating system and then be able to restore directly from that. So really, if you're trying to consolidate off of old hardware, you're trying to move from physical into virtual, there's lots of tools that are actually built into the platform that make that much easier. And we do support a broad range of different, both physical machines as well as virtual machines. So, and in most cases, you can see there's a lot of green dots on this slide. We're able to do that backup and then restore to even to a dissimilar hypervisor environment. So, that can sometimes be interesting when you're trying to move, across platforms. And that's kind of one of the things that, because of the way that the Acronis Cyber Tech Cloud works, we're able to actually bridge that gap between those things. And that actually includes, as well, we have the ability for cloud workloads, as long as it's a full virtual machine where there's an operating system and you can install the agent, we can even back up workloads that are running in AWS, Azure, and then be able to restore those to hardware, or vice versa, be able to take something that's running as a physical server today and back that up and then restore that as a virtual server in the cloud. So taking a quick look at sort of the value is you can easily deploy all of these into your environment because it's all integrated. So the backup, the DR, I think, if anyone was in the general session this morning, we saw Patrick talk about the little green buttons to turn things on. We're really trying to make it as simple and take those complex, difficult tasks and boil those down so that they're easy to be able to do. So the simple turn on of the button, you have disaster recovery. And you can also turn on things like the data loss prevention. So any to any is it's a bold statement. There's a lot of different things that when people think about being able to migrate and move workloads from one location to the other. And so I wanted to see if there was anyone who had any questions about things we've talked about so far, or anything else that they wanted to bring up. Anyone have any questions about? Yep, just get a microphone so other people can hear you. Perfect.
Sorry. The part where you said that you run up the virtual machine off the backup, like
Yep.
you're actually running the machine like itself, like a VMware?
Yeah. So what we have the ability to do is in VMware or in Hyper-V, we install the agent at the hypervisor level, and then that allows you from the interface, from the cloud interface, that management console that we have, to be able to choose the backup, right? So you can choose the actual backup, and there's a restore button, and right next to it there is a run as VM button. So what you do is you click on the run as VM button, you then go and select the host that you want to run that on, and it uses the APIs to be able to actually create, it goes and searches, makes sure there's enough, it creates a small sector on that disk for changes to happen, but it will from the backup, and that's why it can happen so quickly. Usually it's anywhere from about a minute to 2 minutes, and you have that VM up and running. And again, it's exactly what is ever in the backup. So you have to have the entire machine backed up to be able to do it. You can even do disk mapping if you want. And then once that's up and running, you can use it for those use cases I talked about. You can run the application. You can even use it for migration because there's a finalize. But when you're done with it, you just hit delete and it takes it away. Yeah, no problem. It's one of those things that it's really cool. But some people who even are familiar with the platform aren't aware it's something. It does require the agent is installed on the hypervisor to be able to do it, but it works really, really well. Another question?
Yeah, actually, just more of a follow-up to what you just mentioned. So when you hit the finalize button, it essentially updates that backup to incorporate the changes that happened during that session?
Yes, absolutely. So what it'll do is it'll sync the data. It will transfer the data from the backup location to the disk. So you have to have enough disk space on the actual host. But if you have that, it will then merge both the anything that has happened since then with the backup data, and then you can run that permanently in production as the workload, which is why it's a really good migration tool.
And then just one follow-up question to that: So if you had a on-prem Hyper-V environment, you could do a live boot to that environment. Could you do the same thing if you had originally backed it up there? Could you boot it into Azure?
Yes and no. The challenge is when you're running from backup, you really need a low latency connection. Otherwise, if you have a bidirectional connection to Azure, which is low latency, you could certainly do that. It would be essentially traveling from Acronis to the on-prem, and then everything goes back and
Gotcha.
So every time it needs to get a piece of information, it's got to go back, right, and pull that information. So it's generally done from local backups, right? So now the other option is you can also back up, and you could store those backups in Azure,
right?
So that you could then spin them up in Azure, but most of the time, the utilization for that run as VM is in a local environment, but we do support the restore of the data to the cloud. So,
right.
But you don't get that instant on the way you do with the local environment.
Gotcha. Thank you.
We've got another question up here.
Thank you. So being in, this is sensitive. So being in Alaska, as well as all of our clients, internet is quite an issue up there, and so most of our backups are done locally.
Yep.
Does Acronis have any plans to partner with companies like Synology, for example, for speeding up local backups? And how is how is restoration from local backups different than restoration from cloud backups?
Actually, it's a really good question. So. First of all, we support both local and cloud backups. One of the actual things that's kind of cool about the technology is we have the ability to back up locally and then replicate those backups to the cloud. So if you have a slower internet connection, you can actually take those backups in real time to the local, maybe once a day, once an hour, but once a week, you could actually synchronize the most recent backup to the cloud. That gives you that off-site protection. You can certainly back up to a Synology today. We actually support a large number of local options. But as far as partnering with Synology, I mean, certainly we can take a look at that offline and see what you mean by partnering with them. But we certainly support fairly agnostically any sort of local location, as long as the agent, as long as the machine that you're backing up has permission to talk to that location. It's actually really easy to set up in the protection plan.
Thank you.
No problem. See how we're doing for time. Yeah, we got another one here.
There's a product that I don't remember exactly the name, but it's called something like Acronis Cyber Infrastructure that you can install locally, and it becomes a destination for the backups.
So so you have a couple.
Could you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of options there. So Acronis Cyber Infrastructure is actually the software we run in our data centers. So that's where it's a very highly performant, fault-tolerant, and optimized for storing backups. So it's a software-defined storage solution. It also has the ability to spin up compute. So that's how we do our disaster recovery in the cloud, is we use Acronis Cyber Infrastructure. What you can actually do as a service provider is we make that same software available to you. So if you wanted to deploy that in your data center in order to create your own cloud environment, we support that very, very easily to do for a backup location, right? So that you can have those, basically your own cloud as the service provider. And we also, a little bit more of a lift involved because you need a larger amount of both hardware as well as kind of networking infrastructure. You can even offer what we call hybrid DR, which gives you the ability to leverage Acronis Cyber Infrastructure so that the DR could happen in your cloud. That being said, local backups aren't dependent on that. We actually support anything where, whether it's just a local disk, it could be a network attached storage, it could be NFS. So lots of different options to be able to back up locally. We don't require any special software on the destination location. It just needs to be something that the workload and the agent can securely talk to in a local environment.
But the problem there is how to spin up what's failed in a DR site.
Right. So
locally.
Yeah. So from a local point of view, if you have the advantage is when you're storing the backups locally, as long as you have either Hyper-V or VMware in the environment, what you can do is that instant restore gives you the ability to leverage the compute resources of those hypervisors, and they will directly from the backup be able to spin up and run that in real time. So you don't need any additional infrastructure. It's relatively agnostic as opposed to having to because if you want to do the like we have in our cloud, the disaster recovery as a service, you can do that. There's a bit more lift, and generally that's not done at a per customer site. That's more done as a service provider. Cool. Check the time real quick. We probably have run out of time for questions, but I am going to very quickly let you know that we also have a bunch of resources that are available. So if you're looking, Acronis is very, very good at that. And I also like to take a couple of seconds always to talk about Cyber Foundation. So if you haven't had a chance yet, go by the Acronis Cyber Foundation booth, check them out and talk to them. And talking about booths, anyone who wants to see a demo of the Instant Restore, come on by the Acronis booth. Any of the SEs there should be able to show you a version of Instant Restore. Perfect. And with that, I will turn things back over to Jeff.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
And we're actually, I didn't prep this with Stephen, but we're actually working on a case study right now. I'm just going to build on what he said for a second. There was a protecting anonymity for the moment. There's a public-private partnership out of Brazil, and they were backed up. Their service provider had been providing Acronis to them as a backup and disaster recovery solution, but had not started doing one for them for security and for ransomware protection. They were talking to them about that. Now, concomitant with that, about the same time, they were thinking of moving some of their server operations into Azure. And that was another project they were working on. Well, while this was all going on, they got hit with ransomware. Their entire network got locked down. So what we did, in partnership with our Brazilian MSP, we took and we restored their entire operation to Azure. So they already had it set up. They were going to go take some of their operations there anyway. We restored everything to Azure. They got their network cleared up. Then we pulled back and restored just the things they wanted to keep in their data center, restored it back to their data center in Brazil. So it was really a from any to any that went in both directions and solved the problem. And they were down for only a matter of hours. It's rather remarkable. So anyway, thank you, Stephen. Everybody, thank you, Stephen Nichols.